Your brother betrayed you. The words were quiet, almost swallowed by the soft hum of the air conditioning and the muted clink of crystal glasses, yet they landed with the force of thunder inside the 72nd floor executive boardroom overlooking Manhattan. Every polished surface seemed to freeze. Every conversation dissolved into silence. Harrison Vale, a 48-year-old billionaire whose signature could move markets before the ink had time to dry, stopped with the silver fountain pen suspended less than an inch above the final page of a billion-dollar acquisition agreement. Around the massive walnut conference table sat attorneys in tailored suits, investment bankers with tablets glowing before them, board members who had spent months preparing for this historic morning, and representatives from one of the largest technology firms in America. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, sunlight reflected from neighboring skyscrapers, painting ribbons of gold across the marble floor, but inside the room the warmth seemed to disappear. Harrison slowly lifted his eyes toward the voice. Standing just beyond the open doorway was a little black girl no older than 9. Her dark braids were tied neatly with faded blue ribbons. She wore clean but well-worn sneakers, a second-hand denim jacket slightly too large for her shoulders, and a small backpack with one carefully stitched strap. One hand still rested on the handle of a gray janitor's supply cart parked outside the conference room, as though she had accidentally wandered into a place no child was expected to enter. Yet nothing about her eyes looked accidental. They were steady, thoughtful, and far older than the rest of her tiny frame suggested. "Excuse me," Harrison asked softly, his voice carrying across the stunned room. The girl swallowed once before repeating herself with remarkable calm. "Your brother betrayed you." Several executives exchanged confused glances. Someone near the far end of the table let out an uncomfortable laugh that quickly faded when nobody else joined in. A security supervisor standing beside the elevators instinctively stepped forward, ready to escort the child away, but Harrison raised one finger without taking his eyes off her. "Wait." The single word stopped everyone. Harrison had spent decades building Vale Global into one of the most respected technology companies in America. Newspapers called him disciplined. Investors called him fearless. Employees called him demanding but fair. Very few people interrupted him, and no one interrupted a signing ceremony worth nearly $1 billion. Yet here he was, delaying everything because of one sentence spoken by a little girl he had never seen before. Conrad Vale, Harrison's younger brother and the company's charismatic chief strategy officer, leaned back comfortably in his leather chair before offering an amused smile that seemed almost rehearsed. His navy suit looked flawless, his silver watch caught the morning light, and his relaxed expression suggested the situation was little more than an awkward misunderstanding. "Looks like someone took a wrong turn," Conrad said with an easy chuckle. "Poor kid probably followed the cleaning crew upstairs." A few people smiled politely, grateful for any explanation that restored normalcy. Harrison did not smile. His attention remained fixed on the girl. "What's your name?" he asked. "Nia Brooks, sir." "How did you get up here, Nia?" She glanced toward the hallway where a woman in a housekeeping uniform had just rounded the corner, her face instantly draining of color. "Nia," the woman whispered urgently. "Honey, you're not supposed to be in here." She hurried forward, clearly embarrassed. "Mr. Vale, I'm so sorry. She's my daughter. School is closed today, and my sitter canceled. I only brought her because I couldn't miss work. She must have wandered away while I was cleaning the executive lounge." Harrison recognized the woman immediately. Tasha Brooks had worked the morning maintenance shift for nearly 5 years. He knew her name only because he made a point of greeting employees regardless of their position. She always answered with a warm smile before returning quietly to her work. Today that smile was replaced by visible worry. "I'm sorry, sir," Tasha repeated. "We'll leave right now." Nia didn't move. She looked directly at Harrison. Instead, "Please don't sign it yet." Her small voice carried no panic, only certainty. The room became silent once again. Harrison noticed something unusual. The child wasn't frightened by the expensive suits or towering executives. She wasn't seeking attention. She looked like someone carrying a burden far too heavy to keep holding alone. Conrad stood slowly, offering the same polished smile that had charmed investors for years. "Kids have incredible imaginations," he said pleasantly. "My guess is she overheard part of a conversation somewhere and misunderstood it." He walked toward the doorway with calm confidence before kneeling a respectful distance from Nia. Hi there, he said kindly. I'm Conrad. I think maybe you've confused me with somebody else. Nia looked at him without blinking. No, sir. Conrad's smile tightened almost invisibly. You don't know me. I know your voice. Harrison felt an unexpected chill despite the comfortable temperature inside the boardroom. Conrad laughed lightly before standing again. See? Definitely a misunderstanding. Yet Harrison noticed something he couldn't explain. For the briefest instant, Conrad adjusted the cuff of his shirt twice in rapid succession, a tiny nervous habit Harrison remembered from childhood whenever his younger brother became anxious before speaking in public. It lasted less than a second, disappearing behind another confident smile. But Harrison had known Conrad for 44 years. Tiny details rarely escaped him. Outside, distant sirens echoed somewhere below in the city streets while sunlight shifted across the conference table. Inside, nobody reached for a document. Nobody checked a phone. Nobody breathed very loudly. Harrison slowly placed his expensive fountain pen onto the polished wood instead of the contract. The faint click echoed louder than anyone expected. He looked first at the unsigned agreement, then at Conrad, and finally back to Nia Brooks. Tell me, Harrison said quietly, why would you say something like that? Nia looked down for half a second, not because she was afraid, but because she was trying to choose her words carefully in a room where every adult seemed ready to decide she did not belong. Her mother reached for her shoulder, gentle but trembling. Nia, sweetheart, we need to go, Tasha whispered, her voice filled with the kind of worry that came from knowing how quickly one mistake could cost a job, a paycheck, and the fragile stability of a home. But Harrison raised his hand again, quieter this time, and Tasha froze beside the supply cart. Let her speak, he said. Conrad exhaled through his nose, almost laughing. Harrison, come on. We are minutes away from closing the most important deal in company history. Are we really going to pause a billion-dollar agreement because a child heard something in a hallway? Harrison did not answer him. His eyes stayed on Nia. The little girl tightened both hands around the straps of her backpack. The blue ribbons at the ends of her braids barely moved in the cold air drifting from the ceiling vents. I was not listening on purpose, she said. Mama told me to sit in the break room and read. I did. But then I went to look for the vending machine because she gave me $2 for crackers, and I heard Mr. Conrad talking near the private elevator. The boardroom shifted with small sounds, a chair creaking, a tablet locking, someone quietly clearing their throat. Conrad smiled wider, but the smile no longer reached his eyes. The private elevator? He repeated. That is impossible. That corridor is access controlled. Nia nodded. Yes, sir. You used a code. For numbers. Conrad's expression changed so quickly that most people might have missed it. Harrison did not. Evelyn Mercer, the company attorney seated 2 chairs away from Harrison, slowly lowered her pen to the table. What 4 numbers? She asked. Nia opened her mouth, but Tasha stepped in front of her, panic rising. Please, she does not need to answer that. Mr. Vale, I am so sorry. My daughter is bright, but she is still a child. She reads mysteries, she notices everything, and sometimes she puts pieces together that do not belong together. Harrison softened his voice. Miss Brooks, no one is blaming her. Maybe not yet, Tasha said before she could stop herself. The honesty of it hung in the air. Conrad seized the moment with a sympathetic tilt of his head. Tasha, right? You work mornings on this floor. I understand this is uncomfortable. No one wants trouble for you or your daughter. Let us handle this quietly. Take her downstairs, and I will personally make sure this does not go further. The words sounded generous, but Nia stepped closer to her mother. That is not what he sounded like last night. Conrad turned slowly toward her. The boardroom lights reflected off the glass wall behind him, splitting his outline into 2 versions of the same man, one smiling, one shadowed. Last night, he asked. You mean when the building was closed to non-essential staff? Tasha's face tightened. I had the late shift. They called me in because the executive floor needed to be ready for today. And you brought your daughter into the building after hours? Conrad asked gently, but the gentleness carried a sharp edge. That seems like a serious policy issue. Harrison finally looked at him. Careful, Conrad. 2 words, calm and low, and the entire room seemed to understand that a line had just appeared on the floor. Conrad lifted both hands in a peaceful gesture. I am only pointing out the facts. Nia's voice came again, clearer now. He said after you signed, the voting rights would move. He said you trusted him too much to read every page twice. He said by the time you noticed, the company would already be out of your hands. The silence that followed was different from the first. The first silence had been surprise. This one was calculation. Harrison slowly turned his gaze to the thick agreement waiting before him. Pages of legal language, tabs in bright colors, signatures marked in careful places. A document reviewed by teams of professionals. A document Conrad had pushed forward with unusual urgency for the past 3 weeks. Evelyn Mercer reached for her copy, flipping with controlled speed. Paper whispered against paper. "There is no transfer of control in the summary," she said. "There is nothing like that in the board packet." "Because it is buried," Nia said. Everyone looked at her again. She took a breath. "That is what he said. Buried deep enough that nobody would see it until the cameras were gone." Conrad laughed once, too loudly. "This is absurd. She is repeating business words she does not understand." Nia looked at him, her face calm but wounded by the insult. "I understand what buried means." Harrison felt that sentence more than he expected. It was not dramatic. It was not angry. It was simply true. A child did not need a law degree to know when an adult was hiding something. Tasha touched Nia's shoulder again, this time not to pull her away, but to steady her. Harrison noticed the shift. Mother and daughter stood together now, not as intruders, but as witnesses. Conrad walked back toward his chair with deliberate ease. "Harrison, listen to yourself. You know me. We grew up in the same house. I stood beside you when Dad died. I helped you build this company from a rented office in Jersey City. Are you honestly going to let a janitor's daughter put doubt between brothers?" The sentence landed coldly. Tasha's eyes dropped. Nia's chin lifted. Harrison's face changed. Not with anger, but with disappointment so controlled it became almost frightening. "Her mother has a name," he said. Conrad blinked. "Of course. That is not what I meant." "Then say what you mean." Conrad opened his mouth, then closed it. For the first time that morning, his charm had nowhere to go. Evelyn stopped turning pages. Her finger rested halfway down a section marked Supplemental Governance Provisions. The blood seemed to leave her face. "Harrison," she said quietly, "do not sign anything yet." Ivy-colored tabs divided the contract into dozens of carefully organized sections, each one reviewed by separate legal teams over the previous 4 months. Harrison watched as Evelyn Mercer slowly slid her reading glasses into place and leaned closer to the supplemental governance provisions. The room had become so quiet that the gentle turning of each page sounded louder than the traffic floating up from the streets below. Nobody reached for the coffee that had already begun to cool. Nobody checked a message. Even the representatives from the acquisition firm remained perfectly still, sensing that something far more important than a business negotiation had suddenly taken center stage. Evelyn's eyes moved line by line across the dense legal language. Her expression remained controlled, but Harrison noticed the slight tightening around her jaw. He had trusted Evelyn for nearly 15 years because she never reacted before she had evidence. When she finally stopped reading, she looked directly at him instead of anyone else in the room. "There is a cross-reference here that should not exist," she said quietly. Conrad leaned forward with a puzzled smile. "What are you talking about?" Evelyn did not answer him immediately. She flipped several more pages before placing one finger on a paragraph buried deep inside an appendix that almost nobody would read from beginning to end during a ceremonial signing. Section 28 refers to an amendment that redirects voting authority if several conditions are met after closing. That amendment is not summarized anywhere in the executive briefing. One board member frowned. "Is that unusual?" "Very," Evelyn replied. "Major governance changes are normally disclosed in multiple places to avoid misunderstandings." Conrad gave a small laugh and rested both hands comfortably on the table. "That is why we hire attorneys. Cross-references happen all the time. This is being blown completely out of proportion." Evelyn looked back at the document. "Perhaps, which is exactly why I would like to review the attached amendment before anyone signs." Harrison remained silent. His eyes shifted from the contract to Conrad. His younger brother still appeared confident, but another familiar habit returned. His right thumb gently rubbed the edge of his wedding ring again and again beneath the table. Harrison had seen that gesture only during moments of real pressure. Nia quietly unzipped her small backpack. Tasha immediately looked down at her daughter. "Nia," she whispered, uncertain whether speaking now would help or make everything worse. The little girl reached inside with careful hands and removed an old smartphone protected by a clear plastic case that had yellowed with age. One corner of the screen was cracked, but the device was clean and obviously well cared for. She held it with both hands as though it contained something fragile. "This is my old phone," she said softly. "Mama gave it to me after she got a new one. It does not have service anymore, but it still records." Conrad turned toward her, smiling patiently. "That is nice, sweetheart. Last night I could not sleep," Nia continued. "Mama was still cleaning offices, so I sat outside the employee break room drawing pictures. I heard voices coming from the conference room next door." Tasha slowly covered her mouth. She had not known any of this. Nia looked at Harrison instead of Conrad. The door was not all the way closed. Conrad's smile faded by the smallest amount. Children often misunderstand adult conversations. Nia nodded politely. "Maybe. That is why I pressed record. I wanted to listen again later because I thought maybe I heard it wrong." She looked down at the phone for 1 second before holding it toward Harrison. "I did not." Harrison accepted the device carefully. It felt surprisingly light in his hand. A simple recording application filled the screen. One file had been created at 9:18 the previous evening. The room seemed to hold its breath as Harrison looked toward Evelyn. "Should we?" She answered with a slow nod. Harrison touched the play button. At first, there was only the faint hum of air vents and distant footsteps echoing through the nearly empty executive floor. Then 2 men's voices emerged beneath the soft background noise. The first voice was difficult to identify because it was farther from the phone. The second voice sounded much closer. "He still reads every page himself," one man said. Another voice answered with a quiet laugh. "Not when he thinks I already have." Several people around the table instinctively looked toward Conrad. His expression did not change, but he no longer looked relaxed. The recording continued. "Tomorrow ends exactly the way we planned. Once the signatures are done, nobody will question the amendment until the transition period begins." A chair somewhere inside the recording scraped lightly against the floor. Then the first voice spoke again. "And Harrison?" There was a pause followed by an answer delivered with calm confidence. "He trusts family more than paperwork." The recording ended with footsteps moving away and a heavy door closing somewhere nearby. Silence returned to the boardroom, but it no longer felt uncertain. It felt heavy. Nobody rushed to speak. Nobody tried to explain what they had just heard. Harrison slowly lowered the phone onto the polished table beside the unsigned contract. His eyes never left Conrad. "Tell me," he said quietly, "why does that voice sound so much like yours?" Conrad leaned back in his chair and folded his hands together with remarkable composure. "Because recordings can be misleading. Artificial intelligence can imitate anyone now. You know that better than anyone in this room. We own half the patents behind modern voice modeling." One executive nodded uncertainly. Another looked unconvinced. Evelyn reached for the phone. "May I examine the metadata?" Nia immediately handed it to her without hesitation. Evelyn connected the device to her laptop using a cable from her briefcase. Lines of technical information appeared across the screen. She studied them carefully for nearly a minute before speaking again. The file was created locally last night. There are no signs of editing, compression, or synthetic generation. I cannot guarantee authenticity without a forensic review, but I also cannot dismiss it. Harrison slowly stood from his chair. The skyline shimmered behind him, but he never looked toward the windows. His attention remained fixed on the contract, the old phone, and the brother he had trusted almost his entire life. For the first time that morning, the billion-dollar agreement no longer looked like an opportunity. It looked like a question waiting for an honest answer. Harrison remained standing beside the conference table, one hand resting lightly on the unopened contract while the other remained at his side. The city beyond the glass walls continued moving as though nothing had changed, yellow taxis flowing through Manhattan streets, pedestrians crossing intersections, helicopters tracing slow circles above the skyline. Inside the boardroom, however, time felt suspended. Harrison looked at Conrad with the quiet patience of a man waiting for the truth instead of an excuse. "I am giving you one opportunity," he said. "Explain the recording." Conrad did not answer immediately. He straightened the cuffs of his tailored suit before offering a calm smile that seemed carefully measured. "The explanation is simple. Somebody wanted to create doubt before this acquisition closed. Whether that recording is incomplete, taken out of context, or deliberately manipulated, I do not know. What I do know is that our competitors would celebrate if we turned against each other today. One of the outside directors slowly nodded, clearly trying to weigh both possibilities. Harrison noticed the movement, but never took his eyes off his brother. You heard your own voice. Conrad shrugged lightly. I heard a voice that resembles mine. Those are not the same thing. Evelyn Mercer closed her laptop with deliberate care. No forensic examination has been completed, she said evenly. However, I also cannot dismiss what we heard. Until we verify every document and every digital file, proceeding with the signing would expose the company to unnecessary risk. Conrad turned toward her. Evelyn, you have worked with us for years. You know how many attempts have been made to sabotage this company. That is precisely why I verify facts before I recommend signatures, she replied. The answer carried no emotion, only professional certainty. Conrad shifted his attention toward the representatives from the acquiring firm. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for this unexpected interruption. I assure you everything will be resolved within minutes. Nobody responded. Even the visitors sensed that the conversation had moved beyond ordinary corporate negotiations. Harrison slowly reached for the contract, closed the leather portfolio containing the documents, and placed it at the center of the table. The soft sound echoed across the room. No signatures today, he said. A quiet wave of surprise spread through the executives. Months of preparation had stopped with one sentence. Conrad's composed expression finally tightened. Harrison, that decision alone could cost us hundreds of millions of dollars. Then we can afford one more day to protect billions. Conrad took a careful breath. You are making an emotional decision because of a frightened child. Before Harrison could answer, Nia spoke with unexpected gentleness. I am not frightened anymore. Every face turned toward her. She remained beside her mother, both hands resting against the straps of her backpack. I was scared last night because I thought nobody would believe me. But now everyone heard the same thing I heard. Tasha quietly squeezed her daughter's shoulder, pride replacing the fear that had filled her face only minutes earlier. Conrad looked at Nia with a sympathetic expression. Sweetheart, sometimes adults discuss complicated business matters. Words can sound much worse when children hear only part of a conversation. Nia nodded respectfully. Then why did you say Mr. Harrison trusted family more than paperwork? Conrad answered almost immediately. Because he does. That has always been one of his greatest strengths. Harrison finally stepped away from the table and slowly walked toward the windows overlooking the city. His reflection appeared beside the skyline, making him look like a man standing between two different worlds. Do you remember our father? He asked without turning around. Conrad smiled faintly. Of course. He told me something when we opened our first office in Jersey City. He said contracts protect companies, but character protects families. Harrison slowly faced the room again. For 20 years I believed we had both. Conrad lowered his voice. And we still do. Harrison studied him for several long seconds. He wanted to believe those words. He wanted the recording to have an innocent explanation. He wanted the little girl standing beside the housekeeping cart to be mistaken. Yet every instinct built through decades of negotiations whispered that something important remained hidden. Evelyn gathered the phone, her laptop, and the contract into a neat stack. I recommend preserving every document exactly as it exists today, she said. No revisions. No electronic changes. No additional approvals until an independent review is completed. Harrison gave a slow nod. Do it. Conrad's eyes narrowed. Almost imperceptibly. You are launching an investigation? I am protecting everyone in this room, Harrison answered. Including you, if you are telling the truth. Those words left no room for argument. Security personnel quietly closed the conference room doors, not to trap anyone inside, but to ensure no confidential material left before the review began. Outside the glass walls, employees continued walking through the executive floor without realizing that one little girl's quiet courage had just stopped the largest transaction in the history of Vale Global. Harrison looked at Nia one more time. You said you recognized my brother's voice. She nodded. Yes, sir. Is there anything else you remember? Nia looked down for a brief moment, as though searching through every detail stored in her memory. When she finally lifted her eyes again, they were steady. Yes, she said softly. There was one thing he said after everyone else started walking away. I did not understand it then, but I think it matters now. The conference room remained sealed while legal assistants quietly collected every printed document, each page placed into numbered evidence envelopes under Evelyn Mercer's supervision. Nobody argued anymore. The atmosphere had changed from negotiation to careful observation, as though everyone understood that one careless decision could shape the future of Vale Global for years to come. Harrison glanced once more toward Conrad before turning to Tasha and Nia. Please come with me, he said calmly. Tasha hesitated. Sir, I still have half of this floor to clean. Harrison offered a faint smile that carried more gratitude than authority. The building will still be here in an hour. Right now, I need your daughter's help. Tasha nodded quietly. She pushed the janitor's cart against the hallway wall before taking Nia's hand. Harrison led them away from the boardroom, while Evelyn remained behind to begin the document review. Conrad watched them leave without saying another word, but Harrison could feel his younger brother's eyes following every step. The executive hallway seemed unusually long as they walked beneath soft ceiling lights reflecting across polished marble floors. Employees passing through the corridor instinctively stepped aside, sensing the unusual seriousness surrounding the small group. Nobody asked questions. Nobody interrupted. Harrison stopped outside a private executive lounge overlooking the Hudson River. The room was simple compared to the luxury of the boardroom, furnished with comfortable chairs, shelves filled with business books, and large windows that allowed the afternoon sunlight to wash across the wooden floor. He closed the door gently behind them. Please sit, he said. Tasha remained standing for a moment before choosing the chair closest to her daughter. Nia climbed onto the sofa, placing her backpack neatly beside her feet. Harrison poured 3 glasses of water before taking a seat across from them. For several seconds, nobody spoke. The silence no longer felt uncomfortable. It felt thoughtful. Harrison finally broke it. You said there was something else you remembered. Nia looked toward the river outside before answering. After the other man walked away, Mr. Conrad stayed behind for a little while. I heard him talking on the phone. Harrison leaned forward slightly. Did you recognize the other voice? She slowly shook her head. No, sir. I only heard Mr. Conrad. What did he say? Nia closed her eyes for a brief moment, searching through the memory exactly as she had replayed it several times during the night. He said, tomorrow everything changes. Once Harrison signs, nobody will be able to stop Phase 2. Harrison remained perfectly still. Phase 2. Nia nodded. Then he laughed a little and said, he will never think to check the old server. Tasha frowned. Honey, why did you not tell me that this morning? Nia looked down at her hands. Because I did not know if it mattered. I thought maybe grown-ups talk like that all the time. Harrison slowly exhaled. His expression became thoughtful rather than alarmed. No, he answered quietly. Not like that. His mind immediately drifted to an older data center located 2 floors beneath the executive offices. Most company records had been transferred to newer cloud systems years earlier, but certain archived. Files and historical governance records remained on secured physical servers that only a handful of senior executives could access. Conrad was one of them. Harrison had not visited that room in months. Tasha studied Harrison's face carefully. Do you think she really heard something important? Harrison answered without hesitation. I think your daughter notices details that most adults ignore. Nia looked surprised. My teacher says that sometimes. Harrison smiled for the first time that day. Your teacher sounds wise. A gentle knock interrupted the conversation. Evelyn entered carrying a slim folder and her laptop. I apologize for interrupting, she said. I wanted to update you before rumors begin spreading through the building. Harrison motioned for her to continue. The signing has officially been postponed. The acquisition team accepted the delay after I explained that legal verification was required. Harrison nodded. Any reaction from Conrad? Evelyn paused. He requested access to the executive archive about 10 minutes ago. Harrison's eyes narrowed slightly. Was he granted entry? No. I suspended all archive permissions until further notice. Another quiet silence settled over the room. Harrison looked toward the windows where sunlight reflected across the river in slow golden waves. Pieces that had seemed unrelated only an hour earlier were beginning to connect. An unusual contract amendment. A hidden reference buried deep inside legal language. A recording captured by chance. A forgotten server. and now an immediate attempt to reach the archives after the signing had been stopped. Harrison rose from his chair and walked toward the window. "When my father built this company," he said softly, "he always kept one rule. Whenever something stopped making sense, do not argue with it. Follow it." He turned back toward Evelyn. "Prepare access to the original archive room." Then he looked at Nia with quiet appreciation. "Would you be willing to show us exactly where you were sitting when you heard that conversation?" Nia slipped her backpack over her shoulders and nodded without the slightest hesitation. "Yes, sir," she answered. "I remember every step." The executive elevator descended in complete silence, its polished steel walls reflecting four very different faces. Harrison stood nearest the control panel with his hands folded calmly in front of him. Evelyn Mercer held a slim tablet filled with access logs and archive records. Tasha remained beside Nia, still wearing her housekeeping uniform, her identification badge resting against her navy shirt as though reminding everyone that only a few hours earlier this had been an ordinary workday. Nia quietly watched the floor numbers change one by one. When the doors opened onto the lower operations level, the atmosphere shifted immediately. The bright executive floors above gave way to quieter hallways lined with secured storage rooms, maintenance offices, and older technology infrastructure that had remained untouched during the company's modernization. Soft white lights stretched down the corridor, reflecting across sealed server cabinets behind reinforced glass. Harrison had walked these halls countless times during the early years of Vale Global, long before skyscrapers, billion-dollar acquisitions, and magazine covers became part of his life. Every corner carried memories of late nights, impossible deadlines, and dreams that had once seemed too large for a small company renting borrowed office space. Nia slowly stepped out of the elevator and looked around with surprising confidence. "It was this way," she said. Harrison nodded. "Take your time." She walked carefully past several doors before stopping near a small employee lounge containing 2 vending machines, a microwave, and a row of simple wooden chairs. Beside it stood a conference room with frosted glass panels. One section of the door remained slightly different from the rest because the privacy film had peeled away near the bottom corner. Nia pointed toward the opening. "I was sitting right there." She crossed to a chair beside the vending machine. "Mama told me to stay here while she cleaned the offices. I was drawing birds in my notebook." Tasha smiled faintly. "She draws them everywhere." Nia returned the smile before looking back toward the conference room. Then I heard voices. Harrison stepped quietly toward the doorway. Through the small clear space in the glass, the conference room inside was visible from exactly the height of a child sitting in the chair. He immediately understood how she had heard everything without entering the room. Evelyn carefully photographed the position before making several notes on her tablet. "Interesting," she said softly. "The security cameras cover the hallway, but not the interior because this room is considered a confidential meeting space." Harrison slowly looked around the corridor. "Can we retrieve yesterday's hallway footage?" Evelyn nodded. "Already requested." At that moment, a middle-aged man wearing a gray security jacket approached from the opposite end of the hallway. His identification badge read Daniel Ortiz, Director of Building Security. Harrison recognized him immediately. Daniel had supervised security operations for nearly 12 years and had earned a reputation for absolute honesty. "Mr. Vale," Daniel said respectfully, "you asked for camera records." He handed Evelyn a secure flash drive. "Everything from this floor between 8 o'clock last night and midnight." Harrison accepted it with appreciation. "Thank you, Daniel. One question. Did anyone request access to the archive servers after the signing was postponed?" Daniel nodded without hesitation. "Yes, sir. Mr. Conrad attempted to enter Archive Room 3 at 11:23 this morning. His credentials were temporarily suspended under Miss Mercer's authorization, so the system denied entry." Harrison exchanged a quiet glance with Evelyn. Daniel continued. He seemed surprised that access had been restricted. He asked whether it was a system malfunction. Harrison thanked him before Daniel returned to his duties. The hallway grew quiet again. Nia slowly walked toward the conference room door. "There was another thing," she said. Everyone looked at her. She pointed toward a framed painting hanging opposite the conference room. The man talking with Mr. Conrad touched that picture before they left. Harrison frowned slightly. "Touched the painting?" Nia nodded. "I thought it was strange because nobody touches pictures." Harrison walked toward the landscape painting. It showed a peaceful autumn lake surrounded by orange trees. He gently lifted the frame from the wall. Behind it, almost hidden from view, was a small electronic access panel built into the concrete. Evelyn looked genuinely surprised. "I completely forgot this was here." Harrison smiled faintly. "So did I?" Before the renovation, this panel controlled the original archive room. Evelyn quickly entered her administrative code. A quiet mechanical sound echoed behind the wall. A concealed door several feet away unlocked with a soft click. Tasha stared in disbelief. "I have worked here 5 years and never knew that door existed." Harrison looked toward the hidden entrance. "Neither do most employees." He slowly opened the heavy door. Cool air drifted from the darkened archive room beyond, carrying the faint scent of electronics and old paper records. Rows of secure cabinets stretched into the distance beneath dim overhead lights. Unlike the modern cloud systems upstairs, this room preserved the earliest legal documents, governance records, ownership agreements, and historical server backups that had shaped Vale Global from the beginning. Harrison stepped inside first, followed by Evelyn. Nia remained near the doorway, quietly observing everything around her. She suddenly pointed toward a cabinet near the back wall. "That one." Harrison turned. "Why that cabinet?" Nia answered without hesitation. When Mr. Conrad finished talking on the phone, he looked back through the conference room window and smiled. Then he said, "Nobody ever remembers the old server." When he said that, he pointed in this direction. Harrison slowly walked toward the cabinet she had indicated. Mounted beside it was a small metal label that had faded with time. He brushed away a thin layer of dust with the palm of his hand. The engraved words beneath slowly became visible. Archive Server 3. Harrison stood motionless before Archive Server 3, his fingertips resting lightly against the cool metal cabinet, while memories from 2 decades earlier returned with unexpected clarity. This was one of the very first secure servers Vale Global had ever purchased, installed back when every dollar mattered and every contract represented another chance to keep the young company alive. Most of its contents had supposedly been duplicated onto modern systems years ago, but company policy required the original records to remain untouched for historical and legal purposes. Evelyn stepped beside him and connected her encrypted administrative terminal to the maintenance port. Small status lights flickered to life one after another, breaking years of silence inside the archive room. The gentle hum of aging hardware slowly filled the air. Tasha remained near the doorway, watching quietly while Nia stood beside her with the same patient expression she had carried since entering the building that morning. Nobody hurried her anymore. Nobody dismissed her observations. Harrison noticed that change and silently appreciated it. Evelyn studied the monitor for several moments before speaking. "The server is intact. No hardware failures. However, someone accessed archived governance files twice during the past 48 hours. Harrison frowned. Who had authorization? Evelyn continued reading. The account used belonged to Conrad Vale. The words settled over the room like heavy rain. Harrison closed his eyes briefly. His brother had legitimate access to nearly every executive archive, so the login itself proved nothing. Yet after everything they had already discovered, another coincidence became increasingly difficult to ignore. "Can you see which files were opened?" Harrison asked. Evelyn nodded. "Corporate governance amendments, historical board resolutions, original shareholder agreements, and..." She paused while another page loaded across the screen. A document labeled Transition Protocol Revision. Harrison slowly looked toward the old filing shelves lining the walls. "I have never heard of that title." "Neither have I," Evelyn admitted. She opened the archive. A single digital folder appeared with a modification timestamp from the previous evening. Before she could access it, another notification suddenly appeared across her display. "Access denied. File restricted by executive authorization." Evelyn blinked in. "Surprise. That should not happen. I have unrestricted legal credentials." Harrison stepped closer. "Try again." She entered additional authentication codes, but the same message returned. Someone had placed a secondary authorization lock on the archive. Harrison felt an uncomfortable weight settle across his shoulders. Whoever created that restriction had expected someone to come looking. Before anyone could speak again, Daniel Ortiz hurried into the archive room, carrying a secure company phone. "Mr. Vale," he said respectfully, "I thought you should know immediately. Something unusual is happening upstairs. Harrison accepted the phone. Go ahead. Within the last 5 minutes, Daniel continued, anonymous emails were sent to every board member, every senior executive, and several outside investors. The message claims that confidential company information was leaked this morning by a maintenance employee and her daughter. Tasha's face immediately lost its color. What? Daniel looked genuinely uncomfortable. The message suggests security failures allowed unauthorized recordings inside executive areas. It also recommends immediate suspension of housekeeping staff, pending investigation. Tasha lowered her eyes without saying a word. Years of faithful work suddenly seemed fragile. Harrison looked toward her before handing the phone back to Daniel. Has anyone been suspended? No, sir. Human Resources requested your approval first. Harrison answered without hesitation. They do not have it. Daniel nodded. Yes, sir. After he quietly left the archive room, silence returned once more. Tasha finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I knew something like this might happen. Harrison turned toward her. Why would you think that? She offered a tired smile that carried years of experience. Because people with ordinary jobs are usually the easiest ones to blame. Nobody asks whether we have enough power to create problems. They only notice that we are easy to replace. Harrison looked down for a moment. Her words carried an uncomfortable truth. Nia gently reached for her mother's hand. Mama did not do anything wrong. Harrison knelt until he was looking at Nia at eye level. I know that. Then do not let them make her feel like she did. The little girl's voice remained soft, but every word carried quiet conviction. Harrison nodded slowly. I will not. Evelyn suddenly looked back toward her screen. Wait. Her fingers moved quickly across the keyboard. The restriction is not protecting the document itself. It is protecting a linked storage location. Harrison straightened. Meaning? The archive references another physical device connected to this server years ago. If the records are accurate, the original data was copied onto a removable backup drive that was never destroyed. Harrison's attention sharpened immediately. Can you locate it? Evelyn searched through another inventory page before pointing toward a line near the bottom of the display. Storage Vault B, Shelf 12. Item number 47. Harrison looked toward the far end of the archive room where dozens of locked cabinets stretched beneath dim lights. Somewhere among thousands of preserved company records rested a forgotten backup that had remained untouched for years. Nia quietly followed his gaze before pointing toward the last row of cabinets. That is where Mr. Conrad looked after he finished talking on the phone. Harrison slowly turned toward her. You remember that too? She nodded. He looked at those shelves for a long time before he left. It was almost like he wanted to make sure something was still there. Harrison exchanged a determined glance with Evelyn. The unanswered questions were finally beginning to lead towards something real, and for the first time since the signing ceremony had been interrupted, he believed the truth was no longer hiding very far away. Harrison walked beside Evelyn toward the storage vault while Daniel unlocked one reinforced door after another using a security key that had not been needed in years. The air grew cooler as they reached the final aisle where long rows of numbered shelves disappeared into the quiet shadows. Every cabinet contained pieces of Vale Global's history, old contracts, engineering sketches, financial ledgers, and backup media preserved for legal compliance. Shelf 12 stood near the far wall exactly where the inventory system indicated. Daniel unlocked the steel cabinet and stepped aside. Harrison carefully counted the labeled storage cases until he reached item number 47. It was a plain gray archive box no larger than a briefcase with an old security seal that appeared untouched. Dust covered the edges, but the seal itself remained intact. Evelyn examined it closely. Nobody opened this box after it was cataloged, she said. Harrison slowly broke the seal and lifted the lid. Inside rested a removable encrypted backup drive together with several printed verification reports signed almost 18 years earlier. One page immediately caught his attention because it carried his own signature from the company's early days beside the signature of his late father. Harrison carefully removed the drive and handed it to Evelyn. Can this still be read? She nodded. If the media has survived, yes. They returned to Archive Server 3, where Evelyn connected a specialized reader kept for historical recovery. The loading process moved slowly across the screen while everyone waited in complete silence. Even the gentle sound of the cooling fan seemed unusually loud. Finally, a directory appeared containing thousands of archived files arranged by date. Evelyn searched for the folder labeled Transition Protocol Revision. This time the folder opened immediately because the removable drive bypassed the secondary restriction placed on the server. Harrison stepped closer. Inside were multiple versions of the same governance amendment. The earliest draft protected shareholder voting rights exactly as he remembered. Another version, created 6 months later, introduced several technical revisions approved by the board. Then Evelyn opened the most recent file dated only 2 nights earlier. She stopped speaking altogether. Harrison looked over her shoulder. Entire paragraphs had been replaced. A hidden governance clause transferred temporary executive voting authority during the post-acquisition transition period to a designated operational trustee. Harrison's eyes moved to the final page. The designated trustee was Conrad Vale. The room remained completely still. No one celebrated. No one spoke. Harrison quietly reached for the printed comparison report automatically generated by the recovery software. Every altered sentence appeared highlighted beside the original language. Evelyn finally broke the silence. This amendment was never authorized by legal review. The revision history shows it was inserted after the board approved the final draft. Harrison looked toward the digital log. Can you identify who made the change? Evelyn expanded another panel. A secure administrative account appeared together with the exact timestamp. The credentials belonged to Conrad Vale. Tasha slowly covered her mouth. Nia looked not at the screen, but at Harrison. She saw disappointment rather than anger in his face. Years of trust were dissolving line by line before his eyes. Daniel quietly stepped forward. There is more. He handed Harrison a printed incident report that had just arrived from the security office. Our information technology department completed the preliminary review of this morning's anonymous emails. Harrison scanned the page. The messages attempting to blame Tasha and Nia had originated from a scheduling server located inside the executive network using temporary administrator privileges. Evelyn requested the originating credentials. Daniel answered immediately. The same executive account. Harrison closed his eyes for one brief moment before reopening them. The pattern had become impossible to dismiss. The altered contract language, the archive access, the anonymous accusations. Every trail pointed toward the same person. Yet Harrison refused to reach a final conclusion without allowing every fact to stand on its own. Prepare complete copies of everything, he said calmly. Digital logs, recovery reports, revision history, email routing records, chain of custody documentation. I want every page verified independently. Evelyn nodded. Already in progress. Nia quietly walked closer to the monitor. So Mama did not do anything wrong? Harrison turned toward her. His expression softened immediately. No. She did exactly what every honest employee should do. She came to work. She took care of her responsibilities. And she raised a daughter who chose to tell the truth even when it would have been much easier to stay silent. Tasha's eyes filled with emotion, but she remained composed. She only did what she believed was right. Harrison smiled gently. That is exactly why it mattered. Before anyone could say another word, Daniel's company radio crackled to life. A dispatcher spoke with unusual urgency. Director Ortiz, please respond. Mr. Conrad Vale has requested an emergency meeting with every board member in the executive conference room. He says he has new evidence proving the acquisition must proceed immediately. Harrison slowly looked toward Evelyn. She closed the archive folder containing every recovered document and placed the backup drive into a sealed evidence case. Harrison accepted it carefully. Then it is time, he said quietly, for everyone to see the complete truth. The executive conference room was even quieter than it had been that morning. Every chair around the long walnut table was occupied once again, but the atmosphere had changed completely. The excitement of a historic acquisition had been replaced by cautious expectation. Board members sat with folded hands. Outside investors watched without speaking. The unsigned contract still rested in the center of the table exactly where Harrison had left it, untouched, almost forgotten. Conrad stood near the presentation screen with the same polished confidence he had carried all morning. Thank you for returning so quickly, he began. I understand that unexpected accusations have delayed today's signing. but I believe we can resolve every misunderstanding and move forward." Before anyone answered, the conference room doors opened. Harrison entered first with calm, measured steps. Evelyn Mercer walked beside him carrying a sealed evidence case. Daniel Ortiz followed with documented security reports, while Tasha and Nia quietly entered last. Several executives immediately turned toward the little girl. Only a few hours earlier, she had been an unexpected visitor. Now every person in the room understood that she had become the reason the company had avoided making an irreversible decision. Conrad smiled politely. "Harrison, I am glad you are back. I was just explaining that misinformation has created unnecessary confusion." Harrison did not interrupt him. He walked to the head of the table, placed both hands lightly against the polished wood, and looked around the room before speaking. "This meeting will continue," he said calmly, "but not for the purpose we originally planned." He nodded toward Evelyn. She connected her laptop to the large presentation screen. Instead of financial projections, the display showed two versions of the same governance amendment side by side. Entire paragraphs appeared highlighted where changes had been inserted. Evelyn addressed the room with her usual professional composure. "These are authenticated recovery files obtained from Archive Server 3 using an original backup drive preserved under company retention policy. The left document is the board-approved version. The right document is the version prepared for today's signing." Quiet murmurs spread across the room. Harrison remained silent, allowing everyone time to compare the documents themselves. Evelyn continued. "The highlighted language transfers temporary executive voting authority after closing. That language does not exist in the approved version." One board member adjusted his glasses. "Who authorized those revisions?" Evelyn pressed another key. The revision history appeared together with system authentication records. Every timestamp aligned with the recovered archive logs. At the bottom of the screen, one executive account appeared repeatedly. "Conrad Vale." No one spoke. Harrison finally turned toward his younger brother. "Would you like to explain this?" Conrad looked at the screen for several seconds before answering. "Those records can be manipulated." Daniel quietly stepped forward and placed certified security reports before each board member. The archive logs match independent server records, building access reports, and administrator authentication history. Conrad's confidence began to fade. "Someone could have used my credentials." Evelyn immediately displayed another report. "Yesterday evening, your credentials. Access the archive from the executive conference room. Building cameras confirm no one else entered during that session." Harrison slowly reached into the evidence case and removed the old smartphone Nia had carried in her backpack. He placed it gently beside the contract. "This recording brought us to the archive." Then he lifted the sealed backup drive. This confirmed the document revisions. Finally, Daniel placed the email investigation on the table. And this traced the anonymous accusations sent against Tasha Brooks and her daughter after the signing was delayed. Harrison looked toward Tasha. "You were blamed for protecting this company." Tasha lowered her eyes. "I only came to work." Harrison smiled gently. "Exactly." He then turned toward Nia. She stood quietly beside her mother, still wearing the same denim jacket and blue ribbons she had worn that morning. Nothing about her appearance suggested power or influence. Yet every executive in the room understood that the future of Vale Global had changed because she chose to speak instead of remaining silent. Harrison addressed the board. Today, a child noticed what experienced professionals overlooked. She did not possess legal training. She did not understand corporate strategy. She simply recognized that honesty matters more than status, and that truth deserves to be heard regardless of who speaks it. He slowly closed the unsigned contract and handed it to Evelyn. "This acquisition is officially canceled." No one objected. Several board members quietly nodded in agreement. Outside investors exchanged thoughtful glances before one representative finally spoke. "Mr. Vale, disappointing as today's outcome may be, I would rather negotiate with a company that protects its integrity than one that sacrifices it for speed." Harrison thanked him with a respectful nod. He then looked once more toward Conrad. There was sadness in his expression, but no anger. "Business can recover from a lost opportunity," he said quietly. "Trust cannot recover unless truth comes first." The room remained silent as Conrad lowered his eyes without another explanation. Harrison walked toward Nia and knelt so they were face to face. "This morning you asked me not to sign." I listened because something in your voice reminded me of a lesson my father taught me many years ago. Never ignore the smallest voice when it speaks with the clearest conscience. Nia smiled shyly. I just wanted you to know the truth. Harrison returned the smile. And because you did, you protected thousands of employees, every shareholder in this company, in a future that almost disappeared before anyone realized it. Thank you, Nia. For the first time that day, sunlight filled the conference room without tension. The billion-dollar agreement remained unsigned, but something far more valuable had been preserved. An empire built on innovation had been saved by integrity, and the smallest voice in the building had become the one everyone would remember.